okay?
You're fine.
Yes.
Great. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm Stephen Procopio. I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. We are a state policy research and watchdog group. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. I particularly want to thank ExxonMobil for sponsoring not this webinar, but the past 3 webinars that we've had. They've been an excellent sponsor and allowed us to do this. Today, we're going to be talking about what happened in the 2020 legislative session. There might have been 1 or 2 things that we're doing. We're going to have in the chat, we're going to put the link to our most recent publication on what we thought happened. And there's a lot of details in there about what was going on with spending and public meetings and some other things. But we're not here to talk about that. We'll have that as a resource for you. Y'all are here to hear from our esteemed panel. I'd like to introduce them very quickly. We have Representative Royce Duplessis. He is the vice chair of the House and Governmental Affairs Committee. And also, I've heard 1 or 2 things about Representative Duplessis. I know you're running along with your, any news you can share?
Yeah, well, I did announce today that we'll be running for the vacant Senate District 5 seat. So, yeah, one of my colleagues has announced. I'm not sure if any other my other colleagues have announced. I don't know what the field will look like, but I did announce today that myself, I do intend to run for that seat. So.
Okay, good. I think that's Representative Mandy Landry. I want to make sure PAR's got to be impartial to everyone. So I want to make sure. But thank you for joining us. And just to let you know, we have a whole participants full of the media and the most important people in state politics, but no pressure. I'll move on to Senator Beth Mizell. Senator, you're also the President Pro Tempore of the Senate, and we have spent a lot of time together on early childhood education in various meetings. I appreciate you being here. And last but not least, you always get introduced last because of the Z thing. We'll work it around. Representative Jerome Z. Zeringue, who is chairman of a committee most of y'all have probably heard of, known as Appropriations, where a lot of activity, there was a lot of money to spend, had to work particularly hard this time, although probably, better that than having a cut. A couple of housekeeping things. Thanks everyone for participating. I want to let you know we have these meetings at 12:15 so that people have 15 minutes to heat up their lean cuisines or their leftover food from last day and enjoy this during lunch so you don't have to miss too much. We keep it to 45 minutes, so we're going to try and end at 1 o'clock. Also, a lot of people can't be here even with that, so we will put this on YouTube and we will send out a link so that everyone can participate. Also, please put your questions in the chat or the question and answer. Melinda will be the curator of those and asking them. We have yet to get to all the questions everyone's asked. The sooner you can get your questions in, the more likely that we'll be able to ask them. If there are a lot of similar questions, usually we try to group them together as well, just so we can try to get through as much as possible. I know we want to really focus on what y'all have to ask because there's a lot of things that happen. We want to try and cover as much ground as possible. With that, I will start with a 1 or 2 broad questions, and Melinda will follow it up before we get to the participants' questions. So let me start off with just 2 sort of simple questions. First question is, what went right in the session? What's sort of the favorite thing or thing you're most proud of that the legislature did this past session? Let's start in reverse order. Z, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having us. It's great to be here. I guess from my perspective, the thing I'm most proud of and one of the best in terms of accomplishments that we were able to achieve this session, from my perspective, is the commitment that we made to education. Everybody considers this the session of education, both for higher education, K through 12, and early childhood, significant advancements, and also for infrastructure. So I guess for the most part, we did a good job of utilizing the available dollars, addressing critical priorities this session. One of the things that I think we could have done better is maybe we did address issues of debt. Maybe we could have looked at maybe some of that. So I think those 2 are mine.
Great, thank you.
Those questions.
Yeah, and that's sort of the other part is that in addition to what went right, you could tell me what missteps you thought the legislature took, or maybe step backwards, or things that we didn't miss, so missed opportunities. So let me go with Senator Mizell. Why don't you tell us what you think we did great and what also could have been improved?
I'll have to agree with Z that the infrastructure was a huge step. I mean, that's been a struggle, a frustration for a long time, and to have really hit it head on the way we did. I think that's a huge forward motion. Probably the gains in education and the frustrations are in education that we went, we took a few steps forward, but then we kind of hesitated. And, you know, I was incredibly disappointed not to get the third grade retention bill through the Senate. I think that the standards on reading are going to be a game changer in education. That and the emphasis on early childhood, I believe, is going to be the way we dig ourselves out of the bottom of the list, and that's really important. With the infrastructure, the emphasis on broadband, we still really don't have an awareness that so much of our state is not connected. And, you know, all the bridges in Baton Rouge are not going to make people in Franklinton connect. I mean, so we really got to see this as a tandem approach to really recognize what our rural areas are dealing with. So I think that.
Thank you so much. Candidate Duplessis.
Did you candidate? That's a fair way to split it. So I've been in the legislature now for just over 4 years, and this was my first time going through a legislative session where we had gotten the budget done so quickly. I'm sure many of my colleagues will probably say the same in terms of their experience. And I think that's probably something that we could say we got right, because I think if you look at what many of the governor's proposals were for his budget and what was agreed upon in the end, I think that was a good thing. I agree with Z as well. The investments in education, we saw historic investments for higher ed. That was huge, and even the 84 million towards early childhood was a huge step. I think we all wanted to see more for teachers, and even though we're now closer to the Southern regional average, while the 1,500 is certainly something that I celebrate, I also think that not getting to that 2,000 is something that I would probably put in the category of, you know, something that probably didn't go where many of us wanted it to go. But it doesn't mean we can't try to keep pushing towards that, not just reaching the Southern average, but exceeding the Southern average. And I agree with Senator Mizell that's going to be the key, certainly on the early childhood front. So big investments there in education. I would have to join in the same chorus that we've already heard, that was absolutely one of the things that went right. And again, I'm not sure how deep we're going to get into some of the bills that divided us as a body, but you know, those are never easy. Those are never fun, and I think they end up oftentimes getting in the way of doing the kind of things that we just talked about around investing in education and investing in infrastructure, things that we often stand united on, even if it's broadband. You know, those are really the challenging issues. But overall, the fact that we got the budget done as quickly as we did, and it didn't lead to any blowups in the end, I think that was something that we can definitely count as a success.
Thank you so much, Representative. I appreciate it. So those are the warm-up questions. Before I turn it over to Melinda, I also want to give a shout out. I noticed we have several PAR board members on there, and I appreciate all their support they're giving us, and as well as a few PAR Future Leader Council. This is something we're trying to get young professionals more involved in PAR, and I really am heartened to see how much involvement we have from them as well. So maybe they might throw a question or two in there. So with that, Melinda, I'm going to toss it over to you, and you can start asking them the tougher questions.
Well, thank you all again. And to everyone watching, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat, because we're getting some already and we're never going to get through all of them. And if you're late, we will probably miss yours entirely. The first question we got is actually one that I thought I was going to ask as well, which is, I know we're talking about the session that just ended, but it seems like there may be another special session on the horizon. It's very unclear right now. In terms of redistricting, obviously a lower court federal judge has ruled that the map that was passed by the House and Senate, she threw that out and said that there should be a second majority minority congressional district that was added to the 6th district map. And now the 5th Circuit has put at least a temporary stay on that decision. So what do y'all expect will happen? Do you think that the legislature can wait until the entire appeals process is finished? Or are you anticipating that there will need to be some sort of special session coming soon to redraw that map? And I guess let's start in reverse again, and I'll start with Representative Duplessis.
Well, let me just start off by saying that the ruling from the district court for me didn't come as a surprise, because being someone who was really involved on the committee on the House side, I've always been really clear that this is pretty simple when you look at the map, that the map should have had 2 districts drawn where minorities could have been competitive. So I was happy to see that the district court agreed. I also wasn't surprised, unfortunately, that the Fifth Circuit ruled and issued the stay that it issued. I think right now there are probably more questions than answers as it relates to whether or not we're going to go back in. I think we absolutely should. And we should go in and honor the Voting Rights Act, redraw these maps to try to avoid having these questions out there as we are now approaching qualifying in July for the next congressional term. So I think we absolutely should go back in. I think there's more than enough time to do it, to get it done. And that's certainly what I'm pushing for.
Okay, and I don't know, Senator Mizell, why don't you talk through what you think will happen with redistricting?
Well, I think it's going to be telling when we get the decision from the Fifth Circuit. Right now, the attitude seems to be, as a legislature, we all voted in favor of those maps from the redistricting session. So the challenge is going to be whatever they say the direction we take now. So hopefully we'll have some time to work through that. But there was an agreement when we left the redistricting session back in February. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. People are pretty much, the arguments that have been given, I don't believe they've changed. I mean, so that's going to be a kind of a rehashing, I would think, at least on our side.
And Representative Zeringue.
Yeah, an interesting question is going to be if, in fact, we have to comply with the request from the governor for the special session. I think the president and the speaker has asked, based on the ruling of the Fifth Circuit, that we hold off on that. But there's some question as to whether or not constitutionally, can we just not show up? So they need to address that question before next week, or we just show up and then allow the courts to take control of this thing. I think for the most part, everyone pretty much assumed that the courts are going and we're going to decide this. Much credit to, I know John and John Stefanski and Senator Hewitt put a lot of time in with their committees, and the whole legislative body, both House and Senate, put in a lot of work in public meetings and public hearings throughout the state. And I think as best they could, they addressed the critical issues, and the maps reflect what the majority of the legislative body in the House and Senate agreed to. So we assumed at the end it was going to be the courts, and the courts will just probably decide how this goes. The challenge is going to be until the qualifying in July, which is coming up pretty quick, if there's going to be an opportunity for the courts to rule that. But I guess the immediate question right now is what happens next week if, in fact, we are go back into the special session or not, and constitutionally whether we can not and let the courts finish their process.
Right. Well, Senator Mizell, I think this question is for you. One of the first questions we got is something you referenced in your opening remarks about Representative Richard Nelson's literacy bill, the one that would have allowed, would have prohibited the promotion of third graders to fourth graders if they couldn't pass a reading test, essentially, with some exceptions. And we have a question about why that failed in the Senate. This person is obviously a supporter of it and wants to know what was the problem in passing it in the Senate, since it moved fairly easily through the House.
That was an interesting conversation, and I think you could do a study on the way people vote based on the responses to that bill. Several no votes initially were changed in conversation. There was some confusion on what the intent of the bill was, what the effect of the bill was going to be, whether Mississippi's numbers were true, whether it was going to create a hardship on teachers, overcrowding in facilities. But it came down to so much of what I think my colleagues would see on their side as well, is that it was almost seen as undermining the role of the teacher rather than facilitating reading for the child. And that became kind of the split. And it was to convince people, finally people started hearing from teachers that supported the bill. And we just never got the chance to bring the bill back up for the reconsideration, because some people were locked in, and it kind of gets into the pro-charter, anti-charter. We've reached an interesting place with education in our building, where there are sides being taken that have no consideration on the well-being of the child.
We have a few questions along the same subject line about the final day of session. And there was a lot of, there were a lot of bills that just got sort of hung up on the calendar. People were taking votes on different sides to hear those bills, but then for some reason, things didn't actually get hearings, even though they lingered around for a while. And people are asking why those bills, clearly some of the people who were entering these questions had bills that they were disappointed did not get hearings on the final day. And there were clearly discussions of gamesmanship between the House and the Senate. So can somebody talk through why all these bills got left sort of on the cutting room floor without even getting debates on the floor? Who wants to take that one? That very loaded question.
Go for it, Z.
Well, yeah, thank you, Royce. Great. You see, he's already a candidate for the Senate. He knows how to dodge the questions. No, well, I'll take a stab at it. And again, it depends on who you ask. Quite honestly, I mean, if you ask the House folks, I mean, some will say, well, the Senate kind of took a little too long to address some of these issues and waited till the last minute to get to them. I think if you ask senators and others, they might have a different opinion. But I think the final crunch and the time to get through a lot of the bills that we had that we sent over to the House from the House's perspective probably weren't acted upon in time, or there was sufficient enough time and they weren't taking them up for whatever reason in the Senate and various committees. I know either through several of the committees that they had members who expressed some frustration that they weren't getting their bills heard in committee was a challenge. And I think that was part of the problem. And ultimately that came to the last minute in the crunch of not getting some of those bills through the process.
Senator Mizell, do you have thoughts about this? Obviously, the longer list of bills that got hung up seem to be on the Senate calendar.
I think I like Z's terminology of a crunch. We were referring to it as a standoff. And there were several bills that frankly I was going to carry, and there was a lot of frustration that we were feeling from both sides, and I think it was it made for an uncomfortable last day of session. But you know, at the end of the day, we got a lot of good things done. You know, no matter how it ended that day, we worked together through a lot of it. I think that it's hard to describe the dynamics of what goes on up and down the halls on that last day.
Was it intentional to leave some of those bills unheard? I mean, was that a strategy to sort of slow walk them so that people didn't have to take votes on issues that they were not interested in being on the record on? Somebody's asking that question.
I think there were conversations going on that would have remedied some of what Z referenced as the crunch and that I saw as the standoff. And maybe those conversations didn't mend the problems quickly enough. But I know there were efforts underway to get things moving, and I'm not privy to exactly what both sides ended with that. But I know at the end of the day, we ran out of time.
Representative Duplessis, you had some bills that got caught up in that struggle there. So do you have thoughts about what happened and why some of these bills never got heard or were slow to be heard?
Sure. Well, I can certainly say what happened as it relates to some of the bills that I had. I don't know that I can necessarily say why for everyone's standpoint, because there are so many moving parts in this process. There are so many nuances to this process that, you may not fully, you as a member in the rails on one side of the chamber or the other side of the chamber may not fully be privy to. But what I do know is that I'll give one example. I had a piece of legislation that we had worked really hard on, and we thought we had finally got it into a place where it was agreed upon, got through one Senate committee, got through another Senate committee. It was up on the Senate floor the Friday before the end of session, and it didn't get heard before 6 p.m. So that obviously put us in that 2/3 vote on the House side. And when we came in on that Monday, some things had taken place on that previous Friday, where I don't mind sharing this, Senator Mizell or Chairman Zeringue, because it was made very public on the House floor based on questions that were asked when certain members went to the well to present their bill for consideration. They were asked very point blank, how did you vote on previous calls to have a bill heard after the 82nd day, and whether or not you voted for or against another member's bill to be heard? And I thought that was very unfair and unfortunate, because to ask a member to vote for something different than how they voted previously on a particular bill, I don't think we should ever do that, because that's essentially what we're doing. So if I voted no on a bill that I didn't like during the session, then why should I vote to have the bill heard after the 82nd day? Because it's still a record vote that I'm saying, yeah, let's hit this bill. So members were essentially punished for doing that. And I have no problem saying that, because it was openly said on the floor, and it's just kind of the way it went down. Now, why that position was chosen, I don't know, because this was a piece of legislation that we had worked really, really hard on. But to answer your question, Melinda, I mean, that's what happened in my instance. Mm-hmm. But in terms of other pieces of legislation that may have gotten held up in the Senate, I don't know all of those details, but I do know that there were frustrations on both sides. I know that the Senate had gotten frustrated with the House on some things, and the House had gotten frustrated with the Senate on some things. So, as it relates to my bill, I certainly plan to bring it back next year. And it is unfortunate that it got caught up in that process.
And just to explain to people watching, in case they don't know all the minutia of legislative process, after Friday at 6 p.m., if a bill wasn't on concurrence or in a conference committee, it required a 2/3 vote of both the House and Senate to even get heard on the floor. And so that's how a lot of these bills got hung up in this process. I just want to make sure everybody understands the ins and outs of that logistics. Obviously, one of the things that did get accomplished is a lot of bills on literacy, and there was clearly a focus on literacy this session as part of the big education push. So we have a question from someone asking about, when will there be a focus on literacy for adult learners, that many rural areas of the state suffer from illiteracy among the adult population due to leaving school early. So when y'all are looking through like the literacy discussion, is that something that has been a part of that discussion, adult learners and illiteracy in the adult community? It might be a Senator Mizell question, because education is your area.
Well, I think that in the past, I think that's been kind of left up to the local library to kind of take that role. I know that in St. Tammany, they used to do an evening class for adult learning at all levels. I mean, you could take just fun courses or things as serious as adult literacy. So it's been left up to the locals, but maybe there needs to be an emphasis on that. We've got a lot of people who never got their high set or their what was always a GED because of the literacy concerns, and that's could be a huge part of a workforce that we desperately need put in place, that we need to make ready. That's that's a good direction for us to pick up when we go back next year. I think that's the reality of a lot of our districts that is often overlooked. The rural areas have a hard time with transportation for high set for students, and the adults as well. So I appreciate that question.
Representative Zeringue, is that something that has been talked about in the appropriations discussions? When y'all are looking at ways to fund education issues, are y'all talking about adult learners and people who maybe need literacy assistance at an older age?
Well, there's no doubt that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And again, I think we established the fact that we need to, as early as possible, intervene, and that's where the early childhood education is going to be so important. But right now, I think some of the things that we're looking at, and there's no doubt that we should address that, the MJ Foster Promise program, allowing adults more opportunities to go to either community technical college and other things to provide opportunities for adults. Granted, it's not specific to literacy, but it is addressing the need of adults who either want to get back in the workforce or an alternative training opportunity to go to school. So there is somewhat of a focus on the adult past the higher ed specific college issue and aspect. So, but in regard to literacy and programs, I think we can and should address those, and there may be opportunities in the future to look to do that.
We've gotten a couple questions about people alleging that there's a lack of respect shown to people who are showing up for public testimony to provide their own testimony, and some questions about the overall treatment of people in hearings. Representative Duplessis, let me start with you. Do you see a problem with how people have been treated when they try to offer their personal testimony to the legislature? And do you see anything that needs to be adjusted there?
Well, I'm just going to speak in general on that issue, and then I'll kind of talk specifically. I think in general, members of the public who come and present are treated with respect. However, I have seen instances where, depending on which side of the issue that you're on, whether you're from the public or whether you're on the other side of the dais as a member or as a chair of the committee, you see different issues play out in different ways. So I think no matter what side you're on, you can come in that committee and feel some type of disrespect from a member or somebody who's running the meeting. I think many members of the public leave feeling that way, whether they're being told after 2 minutes they need to wrap up or bring their comments to a close on a very important subject matter that they waited 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to testify on. That's a real sacrifice that the public makes to come in there and to share a personal story and oftentimes share very difficult perspectives that we need to understand. And when members of the legislature aren't sensitive to that, it's problematic. So I empathize with many members of the public, despite what side of the issue that we may be on. But I will say generally, I believe that members are treated with respect. But I think that things get emotional, things get difficult. So I understand why some members will leave sometimes feeling like they were not given the respect that they deserve.
Okay, we have a couple questions about occupational licensing. Y'all have obviously, the legislature has made some changes on that front to try and make it easier for people to get the credentials that they need to get to work and to do away with licensing that people think is burdensome or the requirements are burdensome. Can somebody talk about what strides have been made on occupational licensing and if you think there's more that needs to be done on that front? I don't know who feels comfortable on that subject.
I can go back to the hair braiding days. So I know that there was a big emphasis. I think Representative Emerson worked really hard on freeing up just that very narrow possibility of someone being able to perform that without having to go through the whole cosmetology license process. I think we've been very the effort's been good, but we've got a long way to go. I think one of the things we did, not so much really with occupational licensing, but we are allowing teachers, degree teachers, to be hired that they're not certified, but they are degreed within the fields that allow them to capably teach. And that's going to be a real boon to our teacher shortage. So that's going to be helpful. I think we're going to have to be really open-minded as to how we approach this. And I know you all have worked really hard with that, to trying to open up the occupational licensing, to make us even with the other states in our region. But I think we've made some headway, but not nearly what the opportunities could be if we corrected where we are right now.
Okay. And I know talking about another session when you're already just getting decompressed from the one that just happened is not always great, but I do want to ask folks if y'all are thinking that there will be a veto session this year, is that a given now? Are we at that point? Y'all have obviously had 2 in the last year. Is it to the point where a veto session should be an assumption, or is it going to depend on what bills the governor actually vetoes? Because obviously Senator Mizell, you had a bill that he vetoed last year and he's allowed to become law this year. So can someone talk about the expectation of a veto session and whether you think there will be one? Let's start with Z, since you've had a little bit of a break.
Sure. I think this year, based upon, and you're right, it's more legislative specific in terms of if there's a particular issue or bill. I think a lot of the major issues are either going to continue without either a veto, or the governor's just going to let them go into law. And as far as the budget is concerned, there weren't many changes. It's reflective of what we sent out to the House, to the Senate. So there were a few vetoes on the budget, but it was primarily addressing things that happened in the Senate, primarily to higher education. It was fully funded when it left the House, and it was cut in the Senate. He restored that. So that was only the major issue in taking, I think, $5 million from the Lieutenant Governor's office, of which the Lieutenant Governor agreed to put to address some of those issues that the governor put back in his veto regarding the budget. So I think they're outstanding. There aren't any major issues that would probably warrant or garner enough support to get folks back in for a veto session. And at this point, I don't anticipate. In fact, in talking to the leadership, I haven't heard any major concerns or issues that would that there was a consideration at this point.
So people can take off in July now and go on vacation, is what you're saying.
Well, I don't know. We thought we could do that in June, and maybe or maybe not. We won't be able to do that. So we'll see.
Okay. We have a question about with the amount of storms and natural disasters we've had in Louisiana, why weren't there more environmental protection bills or studies that were passed this session? Who would like?
I'll take that one, because I'll disagree. I think there was a significant amount of money in terms of addressing flood protection issues. Look at what we've done that addressed the issue of debt in reducing and paying off $400 million of the state's obligation for the hurricanes system in and around New Orleans. That's going to, in the future, pay off significant dividends to the people in the future, but more so paying our portion that helps pay for the flood protection around New Orleans. We've also had, I passed a conservation fund bill that will allow for bringing down tens of millions of dollars in federal funds for conservation projects. We had significant investments in flood protection systems outside of New Orleans through in St. John, St. Charles, Terrebonne, in Morgan City and other places, and in and around Lake Charles. So there have been significant environmental and conservation projects, but also flood protection projects and infrastructure. You look at the $450 million we put from the ARP dollars in addressing critical infrastructure needs when it comes to water. Well, over $450 million to address water issues throughout the state. A lot of rural communities, you have people either bathing or drinking brown water. Last year, we put $350 million. This year, $450 million to address those needs. So I would disagree. I think this legislature has done a significant amount addressing not only infrastructure needs, but conservation and flood protection and critical needs throughout the state.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, look, I just want to add to Z's answer and just reemphasize New Orleans and areas around New Orleans, 5 parishes that surround it. So it's not just New Orleans that benefits, it's New Orleans and those 5 surrounding parishes, which
Well, I said New Orleans in
he
vicinity.
touched that. He did. I just have to make sure everybody heard it. That's all. It's my
You mean-
job to make sure, I have to make sure everybody knows it's not just New Orleans that benefits. So
You mean
but
the storm protection
that's
system?
right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah. No, but I agree with Z on that answer. I totally agree. There were significant investments made there.
And we have a question about infrastructure and how y'all, as a legislature, decided to strike a balance between the large scale projects like the Mississippi River Bridge project and some of these other mega projects like I-49 South, but also dealing with parish road needs and preservation and those kind of things. So how did y'all decide how much money to steer in one area versus another? I don't know who would like to jump in on that one.
I'd be happy.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Okay, well, we made significant investments for addressing the infrastructure needs, but also utilizing one-time dollars for those major projects. But the infrastructure projects that we've addressed, 300 million to the Baton Rouge Bridge, 200 million to the Calcasieu Bridge, 100 million for I-49 South and North. And we had over $100 million in preservation, which are infrastructure needs for rural communities that are off the state system for repairing and rehabilitating a lot of the roads. So there was a significant amount of money invested in those major projects. In addition to what's going to happen and help fund that, the sales tax, the auto sales taxes that are going to be directed to that is going to help support those projects well into the future.
Well, let me jump in with a quick question. Just I can't let this pass as a PAR webinar. There was over $100 million spent on special legislative projects. So instead of getting into the details and the arguments on whether it's a good or bad thing, and PAR definitely has our opinions on this, let me ask, there's not a lot of transparency. So briefly, would you mind telling us maybe what some of the projects y'all asked for? And if you would maybe support in the future detailing, if there is a special legislative project, what it's supposed to be for? Because sometimes that happens and sometimes that does not. I'm gonna start with the chair over there because he's probably the most familiar with these.
Well, the projects that we put in that are beneficial to our area are critical bridge projects that were in disrepair, or critical hurricane evacuation routes. There were critical pump stations that we put money in. So to answer your question, I mean, one person's pet project is another person's critical infrastructure. Again, I think it depends on who you're asking and how important it is. But there are projects and funding that go to projects to legislators, because who is in a better position to know what are the most important projects in a particular district and region? And so working with leadership and working with membership, we try to be as fair and equitable as possible. But one of the things we insist on is making sure that these are important projects for your region and supported by the delegation. And so we encourage and try to get the delegation of the region to get behind these projects and support. But as far as the ones we've proposed in our region, it's critical infrastructure projects primarily related to hurricane and flood protection.
Okay, but in the future, can we at least get what some of these dollars are being used for? We know who they go to, but what they're for, because sometimes that happened, sometimes it didn't. Right.
A lot of times we do, and there's no doubt that it seems to be a little cryptic, or we could do a better job in explaining that, and we can work on doing that.
Right. Representative Duplessis, did you get any projects in the budget?
Well, look, I something minimal, but when it comes to that question of quote unquote pet projects, you know, I again, I'm going to agree with the chairman on that I think as representatives, as legislators, senators, whatever, we have a responsibility to go and try to fight for our districts and try to bring resources back to our districts that are going to benefit the people that sent us here to represent them. And I as it relates to the additional language, I would fully support that, because that wouldn't only just benefit the public, it would benefit other legislators when we're reviewing the budget. You know, I think that, you know, on one side, I will say this, and you know, I hope the chairman takes this with the utmost respect, because that's the way I'm sharing it. It not being on appropriations makes it very challenging for other members when that bill hits the floor to properly vet it and to ask the necessary questions about where this money is going, how will this money be spent. So earlier in the discussion, I mentioned the fact that we got through the budget really quickly and we weren't scrambling on the last day of session dealing with the budget. But on one hand, getting through it so quickly, you know, you're not able to ask a lot of questions if you're not involved in the appropriations process and committee, et cetera. So again, don't look that.
I know, but I wanted to make sure though. I don't want it to sound like we're just slipping something through. I don't think you took or availed yourself of the many luncheon meetings we offered for all legislators. We had 6 different meetings with staff to meet with legislators to educate them on the budget and provide information.
I did that. I came to one of those, Z. I did come to one of those.
That's why we had some. That's right, you did. I'm sorry.
I did come to one of those meetings.
Right.
Yeah,
but other people may not have availed themselves.
But that was on the process. And as we know, the process isn't done until it's done. So amendments get made you could be in all those meetings, but if an amendment gets made on another side of the building, or, you know, and again, it's not necessarily anybody slipping anything through, it's just the way the process works. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you for that. That was a great exchange. Yeah. Senator Mizell, is there anything projects you'd like to trumpet?
I'd really like to be invited to those luncheon meetings. And
so do we, Senator Mizell.
Right. We would like that.
but I'd really like to give some perspective. I mean, over and over, as we talk about infrastructure, the building is full of people who either have too much traffic or no traffic. And we're trying to fight for a balance. I've got a highway, my area's waited 30 years for Highway 3241 that was not easy to get funding for this year. It's already, the road's being cut. So without that, there's no link from the rural part of my district into the area that has too much traffic. So you have St. Tammany getting their balance, you know, their infrastructure's there. They've got both chairmen on transportation. They've got the voices being heard. So I think that's the challenge of the state, is to not put all of our eggs in the basket where there's so much traffic that we forsake the ones who are the municipalities that depend on state funding for survival. It's going to be a real challenge. And I agree with Z that the more we explain what the monies are, the easier of a sell it is, because, you know, I'll say some of the projects I got was a regional expansion of Safe Haven, which is a mental health facility. We have a terrible time with overdoses and drug addiction in my area. So this is a regional benefit. I'd be happy to explain that to anybody. And I think the more we share as to what our needs are, the more we understand as a state where the imbalances are. So I think that's a great idea.
All right. Thank y'all all so much. There's tons of questions we didn't get to. We had another question about the fiscal cliff we didn't get to, and I would have loved to ask. And I know there's lots of people.
I got a great answer for that too. If
well, go ahead. We're gonna go over 5 minutes. Go ahead, Z. I'd love to hear it.
Well, no, obviously, again, one of the things that we understand that in 2025, you know, the 0.45 is going to roll off. And also, as I mentioned, that the automobile sales tax, which is currently going to the general funds, 450 million is going to come out through those critical projects we just talked about. So we are, without a doubt, going to face approximately an $800 million deficit. So some of the things that we did in this fiscal year, which is unfortunate because you're not hearing much about it, 1.5% of the overall budget, which is right at around $40 billion, has paid for recurring expenses with non-recurring dollars. So what that's going to do is, and what we're doing without growing government, so next fiscal year, if the budget remains the same or even improves, that means there's going to be 1.5% of the budget that wasn't allocated to recurring expenses without growing government. So close to $200 million is going toward helping address that deficit. So if we continue to work and chip away and the economy continues on at least a level path, we're going to be in good shape, but we're still going to have to address that deficit.
I'm glad I brought that issue because he was clearly prepared for it. So that makes me happy that he was thinking about it. So I really appreciate you chiming in on that. With that, we're a little over time. I think that was fine given the amount of questions that we had, a lot of specific things. I apologize we couldn't get to all of them, but that's just always the case with this. I think we got into a lot of really interesting discussion. even some disagreements, but I want to point out just how civil and cordial everyone was. I think that was a model. That's what we want to have here at PAR, and I really appreciate that. Once again, I want to thank ExxonMobil for helping support this. Next month, PAR is going to be off from these webinars. We're going to take off July because it's July and we need to take vacations, and so do all of the other policymakers that we want off with webinars anyway. So we will be back in August, probably something on education for the start of the school year, or also, or maybe something on flood protection. So maybe Z, I might have you back. I want to hear from the people that were in the audience. Please send us ideas that you have, because I want to do things that are helpful and interesting to you. Make sure those are educational. So if you have ideas on what you want, please let us know. Again, like to get to everything so we can come back to different topics as well. Also want to point out, these are going to be, all of this is recorded and will be on YouTube along with all of our other webinars and other award-winning videos that we have on our YouTube channel. So we will send out a link to everyone, and please let people know about it as well. If you're interested in anything, you can go to our website at parlouisiana.org. Thank you all so much. I thought this was a great webinar. I obviously couldn't discuss everything because a lot of stuff happened, but I thought that was at least a good civil discussion. Thank everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank y'all.